Hi everybody, I hope your Chag was enjoyable, inspirational. All of us know the teaching of Chazal that ben Nissan Nigalu, we were redeemed in the month of Nissan, uben Nissan Asidin Ligael, and therefore in the future redemption is also most likely to take place in the month of Nissan. Mashiach can come every day except on Shabbos and Yom Tov, but Nissan is the highest probability. So the month is running down, but there's still a chance indeed that this will be the month of Geula, and we should pray for it because indeed Klal Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, the world as a whole is desperately in need of redemption. When even the New York Times runs anti-Semitic cartoons, you have to wonder, where is the world going to? Actually, though, it's not so surprising anyway, but okay. So I want to go back a little bit and talk about something about Pesach, but that's also relevant in this period of the year during Sfiras Omer, and that is the interesting dichotomy in the recitation of Hallel. We know, of course, that on Yomim Tovim there is a mitzvah to recite Hallel. It is a rabbinic commandment. The Torah does not require the recitation of Hallel, nor could the Torah require it, since Hallel was composed by David HaMelech many years after the Torah. But rabbinically, on Yomim Tovim, we recite Hallel. But there's a difference between the Chag of Pesach and, let us say, the Chag of Sukkot. On Sukkot, including Shmini Atzeret, we recite a full Hallel for all 7 days of Sukkot and on Shmini Atzeret. And in the Golah, where you have 9 days, Simchat Torah, we recite it for 9 days. For Pesach, we recite a whole Hallel, a complete Hallel, only Leil Seder, the night of the Seder, and the next day. And some people do it in the shul before the Seder. But certainly after the first day of Pesach, we only recite a half Hallel, not a complete Hallel. And that's similar to what we do on Rosh Chodesh, where we don't recite a complete Hallel. The question becomes, why is Sukkot different than Pesach? Sukkot every day gets a whole Hallel, Pesach only day one. So it's interesting that the Gemara itself gives a reason that is less familiar. The more familiar reason that I'm sure you've heard of, I'll mention shortly. But the Gemara gives a technical reason why Pesach is different than Sukkot. And the technical reason the Gemara gives pertains to the Korban Musaf, the additional offering that was brought in the Beis HaMikdash during the Chag. I'm not referring to the Korban Pesach that was brought before the Chag, but I'm referring to the Musaf offerings. On Pesach, every single day of Pesach, the Musaf offering in the Beis HaMikdash was identical. They brought 2 bulls, 1 ayil, 1 ram, and 7 sheep. That was done every single day. As a result, we perceive Pesach as one single Chag, because you do the same thing every day. And as a result, the full Hallel at the beginning of the Chag covers the whole Chag. Sukkot, on the other hand, every single day, there was a unique and a distinct Musaf offering. So every single day, even Chol HaMoed, is deemed a distinct Yom Tov. Therefore, every day has its own Hallel. This is what the Gemara says. This is the Gemara in Erchin, and it really is a technical reason why Sukkot is different than Pesach. But there is a more well-known reason, and the source is a little questionable. There is a Sefer, a Rishon, a medieval authority, called the Shibbolei Leket, again a fairly substantial authority, and the Shibbolei Leket brings something from the name of a medrash, but we don't have such a medrash. Something called Medrash Harninu, an otherwise unknown medrash, that says that since the 7th day of Sukkot, of Pesach, which is a Chag, commemorates the drowning of the Egyptians in the Red Sea, and there is a tradition that when the angels wanted to sing praises to God over the miracle that he did and the Egyptians being drowned, HaKadosh Baruch Hu responded, Maise Yadai Tavu B'yam. The Egyptians are also my creations. I care about them as well. It is a tragedy that they have to be destroyed. V'yatem omrim shira. And you think this is the time to rejoice, to have jubilation. Human beings are dying, and although there are evil people, and although they deserve to die, there is still a sadness in their death. Now, that part of the teaching is actually in the Gemara itself. The Gemara does indicate that. But the Medrash Harninu takes it one step further and says, since Hallel on the 7th day of Pesach is also a commemoration of the splitting of the Red Sea, so the same way that the angels were told to diminish their joy, we diminish our joy by only reciting a half Hallel and not a complete Hallel. Again, I wanted people to be absolutely clear to differentiate between what the Gemara says and what the Medrash Harninu says. It's not the same thing. The Gemara simply brings the point that the angels wanted to praise God, and God told the angels not to do so. That's the famous statement, Masa Yadai Tovu Bayam V'yatem Omrim Shira. That is in the Gemara. But the Gemara never uses that as the reason for half Hallel on the 7th day of Pesach. Right? People are so used to the connection that they figure that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara does not give that as a reason. The Gemara gives the reason that I mentioned a few moments ago. The korbanos are different for Pesach and Sukkot. What the Shibbolei Leket is doing, based on this otherwise unknown medrash, is taking the Talmudic teaching of Rav Yochanan, which is just an observation about the angels, and applying it to us, that on the 7th day of Pesach, our joy is diminished, and that is why we only say a half Hallel rather than a whole Hallel. Now, the Taz, the Turei Zav, one of the great commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, asks the obvious question. The logic that Maisa Yadai, since the Egyptians are drowning, we shouldn't say Shira, that is only a logic for the 7th day of Pesach. If that's the case, we ought to say Hallel, full Hallel, for 6 days. And yet, we stop after the first day. So the Taz gives an answer, a little bit of an indirect answer, that we never want to make Chol HaMoed more prestigious than a Chag. The 7th day of Pesach is a Chag. If you were to say a full Hallel for all of Pesach until the 7th day, you would be saying a whole Hallel on Chol HaMoed, and then you would be demoted to a half Hallel on a Chag. So the Taz says you have to work backwards. If you're not going to say a whole Hallel on day 7, then you're not going to say a whole Hallel on the Chol HaMoed days either, and therefore you will only say it on day 1, or in the Golah you will say it day 1 and 2, because they're treated as variants of the first day. Okay, so this is the Shibbolei Leket in the name of the Medrash Harninu, that the half Hallel of Shvi Shel Pesach, Achron Shel Pesach, is because of Maisa Yadai Tavu Bayam. Yeah.
If you said before that Hallel is rabbinic and not,
yes.
And why do you make a bracha Sheikh Shlomo Mitzvah?
Yeah, yes, that of course is an excellent question. But if you think about it, there are many mitzvahs that are Drabanan that all have the formula Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu, reading Megillah, lighting Hanukkah candles, etc., lighting Shabbos candles. And the Rambam explains, based on the Gemara in Shabbos, that since in Parshas Shoftim, in Sefer Devarim, Hashem commanded us to obey all of the instructions of the sages, Al pi haTorah asher yarucha, v'al hamishpat asher yomer lecha taseh, lo tasur, do not turn away, mikol asher yagidu lecha, that they tell you, yamin, to the right or to the left. Therefore the Rambam says, every time I obey the rabbinic laws, I am fulfilling the Torah commandment of lo tasor, and vice versa. If I violate a rabbinic law, I am violating a Torah commandment.
But Yiboneh is a bit...
Yeah, well, that's true. So, but really, it's a Gemara in Shabbos. Heichan Sivanu, where did God command us? He did not command us to light Hanukkah candles, but He commanded us indirectly, lo tasor mikol asher yagidu lecha yamin usmo, which is why, according to the Rambam, every rabbinic law becomes a doraisa law by virtue of lo tasor. So the question I want to explore is simply this. The attitude of Maisa Yadai Tavu B'Yam, we might describe as kind of a universalistic attitude in which we care not only about the Jews, but we care about the suffering of all people, and indeed even those who are unworthy, we feel, as it were, a pain in their suffering. You might remember the famous, or perhaps infamous, remark of Golda Meir, and again, many people deeply resent part of this remark, as I do as well, but some of it has a core of truth, in which she said, the first part, as I say, people are especially upset about, we can forgive the Arabs for killing our children. That's the part that enrages people, correctly so. But then she says, we can't forgive them for letting us kill their children. Now, in the second part, forget about the first part, which indeed is a totally different thing. There is something to be said in the fact that although the Jewish people are not pacifists, and we are not supposed to be pacifists, we do not turn the other cheek. It is very, very clear, halachically, religiously, and morally. Haba lahargecha, someone that is trying to kill you, hashkein v'harog lo, we kill them first if we can. We are obligated to protect our lives and the lives of our people and our land, and we don't simply let enemies run over us. It is Hashem's will that we destroy those who are trying to destroy us. And indeed, even in the Yam Suf, even though Hashem told the angels, my creatures are drowning, don't say Shira, but who was drowning them? It was God that was drowning them. So we live, in a sense, with almost a cognitive dissonance, in which we do what we have to do, and we do it, and Baruch Hashem, our country does it well. But we do it with sadness, we don't do it with joy. We don't rejoice in the destruction of people, because all human beings are made in the image of God, and all human beings have the potential, or had the potential, to be righteous and holy and good. And if a human being instead weds themselves to the cause of evil and violence and destruction, that is not just a tragedy for the victims, it is a tragedy for the perpetrators themselves, because they have besmirched and they have violated a potential. You know, if you think about, this is a very uncomfortable thought experiment, but you know, in the United States, you have, with unfortunately some frequency, these mass murderers that go into schools and kill people. So, you know, many of them are literally mentally ill. Some are just morally ill, and often they're young people. We just had in the Chabad place in what's the name in California? What's the name of the Poway? Yeah. Again, just amazing. A 19-year-old guy just comes in, and unfortunately a very, very fine woman, really a righteous woman, lost her life. The rabbi lost some fingers, and then he gave a drasha. Before he went to the hospital, he actually went up to give a drasha, to give chizuk. Just remarkable, the courage and the presence of mind that people can have in moments like this. But then you think, imagine a lot of these people still have parents. And if, God forbid, somebody had a child that was a murderer, do the parents still feel love for the child? It's tricky, you know, we don't like to talk about it so much. But there is part of the parent that says, he was a good person. He was a good baby. I don't know what happened. There is something that took over him. So, a normal parent, I'm not talking about the Palestinian parents who glorify what their kid does, but a normal parent hates and despises what their child did. But on some level there's still a love and a tremendous sadness for what that child could have become under the right circumstances. So in many ways this is what Hashem, Kavyachol, goes through as well, in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves even those who go off the wrong path, because they too had a divine soul. So the question I want to raise is this. So on the seventh day we have all of these feelings, but on the first day plenty of Egyptians died as well. The first day of Pesach was Makas Bechoros, the plague of the firstborn.
Probably more died on the first.
And maybe more died. The Torah says, Ein bias. There was not a single home, Ein Shameis, that there wasn't somebody dead. So the attitude on the first day of Pesach apparently is, as long as it's good for the Jews, I really don't care about the collateral damage of other people. Baruch Hashem, we were redeemed. And yet on the seventh of Pesach, all of a sudden we become universalists. Why is there a change? If you're simply going to tell me, on the seventh day of Pesach, we are citizens of the world. And on the first day of Pesach, we only care about, is it good for the Jews? Right? That was Netanyahu's old, I don't even know if he used it this time, but he used to say, Netanyahu, Tov La Yehudim, which was always a veiled hint of where he was going. He has one central electoral strategy, and that's kind of to scare you to death before every election, that if you don't re-elect him, we will be covered with aggression of Arabs that want to destroy us, and apparently it works. That strategy does work over and over and over again. But okay. So the point basically is, what has happened between the first day of Pesach, where we frankly don't really care about what happens to the Egyptians, and indeed we even glorify it a little bit, and the seventh day of Pesach, where all of a sudden we have this Ma'aseh Yadai Tavu Bayam V'yatem Omrim Shira. So let me explain this by reference to a verse that is we say in davening every day, and it's also in the Haggadah, and that is, by Kriyas Yamsuf it is written, Vayar Yisrael es hayad hagdolah asher asa Hashem b'Mitzrayim. Bnei Yisrael saw the great hand that God did against the Egyptians. Vayiru amis Hashem, vayiru. They feared Hashem. V'yaminu b'Hashem. And they believed in Hashem. Uva Moshe avdo. And in Moshe, his servant. That pasuk is in the Haggadah, and by the way, that is the only mention of Moshe Rabbeinu's name in the Haggadah. It's only mentioned once in that pasuk. So it's a little early for next year, but if you want to keep your kids awake, you can kind of, in addition to the Afikoman prize, you can offer them a prize if anyone points out where Moshe Rabbeinu's name is mentioned in the Haggadah. Now, the pasuk seems to say that Kriyas Yamsuf gave us a certain aspect of Yirat Hashem that we didn't have before Kriyas Yamsuf. Now what is that? We had gone through the Makos, we had seen the power of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to change nature. What was so unique about Kriyas Yamsuf already experienced in the Makos? So there's an observation of the Maharal who says the following idea. If you look at all of the Makos and you see the miracles that God did, you will note that all of the miracles were in the direction of punishment and retribution of the Egyptians. The water turned to blood, the frogs, the lice, the wild animals. Meaning, Bnei Yisrael did not have a miracle performed for them. Rather, they were left to the pre-existing natural order. Their water did not turn to blood. You see? In other words, the miracle of the Makos was all in the direction of retribution and punishment. The benefit to Bnei Yisrael was in the nature of teva, leaving them to the pre-existing normal functioning of things. Kriyas Yamsuf, you see exactly the opposite pattern. The miracle of Kriyas Yamsuf was the splitting of the water, the saving of Am Yisrael. The death of the Egyptians was actually not miraculous. The Egyptians did not die in a miraculous way, at least in Pshuto Shel Mikra. They died by God stopping the miracle of the water separating. And under normal natural law, if you find yourself in the middle of an ocean, you will tend to drown if you're under the water. So, you see the difference here. In the case of the Makos, the miracle was the Onesh, and the benefit for Am Yisrael was the Teva. By Kriyas Yamsuf, the miracle was the Hatzalah of Am Yisrael, and the Onesh was the Teva. Why is that important? Because, excuse me, sorry, I have a post-Pesach cold or something. The explanation is this. When the Jewish people walked away from Mitzrayim, they were overwhelmed with the power of God to change nature in order to punish evildoers. And therefore, when they walked away from the Makos, they certainly had fear and reverence for the awesome power of the Almighty. But they did not yet experience a full measure of God's love for them, because God did not change the natural order of the universe to save them. God changed the natural order of the universe to punish the bad people. So the Makos gave us Yiras Hashem, fear of God. But Kriyas Yamsuf, we experienced God's love for us on a much deeper level, because God changed the order of the universe not to punish, but to redeem, not to destroy, but to save. So as a result, we can conclude that Kriyas Yamsuf was an experience in which we felt God's love much more deeply than even Yetziat Mitzrayim itself. Because Kriyat Yamsuf is a miracle of love and not a miracle of retribution and punishment. Now, there's a famous and beautiful pasuk in Mishlei, in Proverbs. And I mention this pasuk all the time because it really is such a beautiful and important pasuk. Kamayim hapanim el panim, kain leif ha'adam li adam. What does that pasuk mean? As water reflects the face that you show it, so too the heart of a human being reflects back to you what you show that person. The Vilna Gaon explains, if I look down into a reflecting pool of water, if I smile at that water, I will see a smiling face. If I frown at that water, I will see a frowning face. The water reflects back whatever I show the water. So Shlomo HaMelech says, the heart of a human being reflects back what that human being is shown. I show a human being love, care, concern, compassion, respect. They will feel that way about me. I show them denigration, I show them that they don't matter, then they will feel that way about me as well. Again, I'm not talking about extreme cases. I'm not suggesting you walk into Palestinian Authority and be nice and assume something good will happen. There are going to be many, many exceptions. But at least we can talk about Achenu B'nai Yisrael, that there is kamayim hapanim el panim, leif adam li adam. Now this is really part of the reason why religious secular debates in Israel never ever ever get resolved in a truly satisfactory way, because each side is doing the opposite of what Shlomo HaMelech tells us to do. Each side looks at the other as either evil, stupid, malevolent. If I look at someone as malevolent, they will look at me as malevolent. And as a result, we have an unending spiral of recriminations and counter-accusations, as opposed to the idea of trying to see the legitimacy of the other side's point. That will open them up to see whatever point you're trying to make. Again, I'm not being very specific here, but all I'm saying is that it would appear that if we have very, very different positions about things, if each person tries, or even if one person tries, to find a common ground and a commonality, that will open the other person up to make that same movement. If, on the other hand, the approach is, you're totally wrong and I'm totally right, then it's the opposite. Each one will look at that way at the other, right? I think about this as an example, and I know maybe I'm getting into something that is a little bit of a minefield, but I just want to mention it. When the issue about drafting yeshiva students was first pushed a few years ago, so there was a big, big rally. I think they say 800,000 people. I'm not sure if it was that big. I was not there. Yeah. And it was a rally, a protest rally, and as protest rallies went, it was pretty good. No violence, it was just prayer, tefillah, etc. So people were saying it was a great Kiddush Hashem because there was no denigration and the like. Okay, and as rallies go, there have been worse, so to speak. But I think to myself, okay, there is a philosophy that you don't draft yeshiva students. There is such, of course, there are counter arguments to that. Again, I'm not going to address it, but there is a philosophy that we have to have full-time Torah learning. We can't take people out of yeshiva. This is our defense. But and those who have that shita are certainly entitled to espouse it and talk about it, and try to seek accommodation. But what would have been if at the end of the rally, after they talked about the importance of Torah and the fact that you cannot take a person out of the Beit HaMidrash, they then would have said a tefillah for the benefit of the Chayolim, for the Tzahal. In other words, what if there would have been an acknowledgement? Yes, it is our view that those who are learning Torah are engaged in something that is so important that they cannot be taken away, but at the same time we recognize how important the army is and how appreciative we have to be for the sacrifices that people make. Well, I'm not a prophet, but if you had 800,000 people who you might call Torah-only people, who at the same time acknowledged the Tzahal, the IDF, I honestly think Mashiach would have come. Because that would have been a situation in which each side would then recognize the importance of what each side is doing, that we are on the same team, that we are a family, that we work together, that the Jewish people needs all of these components. As opposed to the idea that when a religious chayal goes to shul at mincha somewhere, a religious chayal, they could be spat upon or have a stone thrown against them. Again, it's just hard to even imagine how such a thing could happen. But the point I'm making is that if you, just as a matter of tactics, Shlomo HaMelech is giving you tactical advice. You want somebody to see your position, then you have to be willing to see their position. Kamayim apanim apanim. Kain leiv adam li adam. And if your position is, I'm right and you're wrong, then your position is going to be, you're right and I'm wrong. And that's where things stand here, in which nothing ever happens except to increase the negativity more and more and more and more, And that, of course, prolongs the Galus and the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Okay, that was a little bit of an editorial commercial. But to go back to this idea, the Baal HaTanya writes that if it's true that if a human being shows another human being love and respect, that'll be mirrored back. Then Kal v'chomer, when a human being feels the love that Hashem has for them, they will feel love for Hashem. In fact, the Baal HaTanya writes, one of the ways, a very powerful way, that a person comes to love Hashem, we say in Shema, V'yahavta es Hashem Elokecha, you shall love God with all of your heart. How do you come to love God? So one of the ways you love God is by contemplating the depth of the love that God has for you, in giving you life and giving you opportunity, in sustaining the worlds, the universes. Now, it turns out, therefore, if it's true that Kriyat Yam Suf was a great demonstration of divine love, because God changed the physical laws of the universe, not to punish the bad guys, but to redeem the Jewish people, then it turns out that if we felt the love of God in Kriyas Yam Suf, that would cause us to love God. Therefore, we would say the following. The takeaway from the Makos was Yirat Hashem. But the takeaway from Kriyat Yam Suf was Avat Hashem. Because by feeling God's love for us, which was enhanced by Kriyat Yam Suf, we develop a powerful love for God. So this is what Kriyat Yam Suf gave us, Avas Hashem. But you'll ask the obvious kasha, but that's not what the Pasuk says. The Pasuk says, Vayar Yisrael es hayad hagdola asher asa Hashem leMitzrayim. They saw the great hand that God did to the Egyptians. Vayiru ha'am. They feared. So it doesn't say Kriyas Yam Suf gave us Avas Hashem. It said it gave us Yiras Hashem. And how does that fit? So for that we have to analyze the terms Avat Hashem and Yirat Hashem a little bit more closely. Yirat Hashem, already from the time of Rav Sadragon, is divided into two components. There is what you might call a lower Yira, and there is what you might call a higher Yira. The lower Yira, Yirat HaOnesh, fear of punishment. I better behave, because if I don't behave properly, there are going to be consequences after 120 years. Now, we like to poo-poo that Yira by calling it a very low, superficial level, but as Ramban points out, if we truly internalized Yirat Hashem on that level, we would never sin. Because whatever benefit the sin gives us, rest assured that the negative consequences are going to be far greater. But that's called Yirat HaOnesh, fear of punishment. But then there's another aspect of Yira in which the translation would not be fear, but it would be awe, reverence. Right? So the word fear, even in English, can have those two connotations. I'm fearful of something happening to me, or I have fear in the sense of reverence and awe. And that's a higher level of Yira. That is called Yirat Haromamut, awe of God's infinite greatness. Now that type of awe we have even for human beings in one level or another. If a president, maybe not the American president or even the Israeli president, Israel, for two different reasons. In Israel, the president is less formal, and in America we have other issues, although somebody did write, Rabbi Pruzansky, who's a very eminent Rav in the United States, wrote a whole Dayenu poem based on all the things that President Trump has done for the state of Israel. If he would have done this, Dayenu, and he did it, right? So 15 different things. So on one level, There may be issues of midot and refinement. On the other hand, he certainly has been good to Klal Yisrael, and indeed, as he himself points out, he is the only person in all the presidential politics, all of whose grandchildren are Jewish, and some even from, which is a very, very interesting thing. But in terms of awe, if Queen Elizabeth would walk in, now in this day and age, if you don't curtsy or whatever it is, she's not going to have you executed. You're not afraid she's going to do something to you. Nice woman, she won't do anything to you. But there's a certain awe, of certain reverence for the office. You want to be on your best behavior, etc. Well, when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how much more so? So the lower thing is called Yirat HaOnesh. The next level is called Yirat HaRomamut. Then you go to Avat Hashem, where it's no longer a question of fear or reverence, it's I love God. But then, Maral writes, there is a Yira, a third level of Yira, that is even above Ava. So in the latter, there's Yirat HaOnesh, Yirat HaRomamut, Avat Hashem, and then there is something called Yirat Chet, fear of sin. Yirat Chet means your love is so intense that you are afraid to do anything that will bring pain to the one that you love. Let's consider a marriage. Let's imagine a person cares about their spouse very deeply, and their spouse is sleeping and is a light sleeper. So you walk on eggshells, you tiptoe around the house because you are afraid you're going to wake them up. Now, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid that if you wake them up, they will hit you with a frying pan? Are you afraid of a punishment? Usually not. Are you afraid because you're in awe and reverence of somehow disturbing the sleep of the king or the queen? No. But because you love and you care about them, and you know they need the rest, you're afraid to do anything that may hurt them or give them discomfort in any way. So that is a yira. That is a yira coming from the intensification of Ava. You know, in Rosh Chodesh benching, this week is Shabbos Mevorchim for Eor. So we're going to ask Hashem in the prayer before Rosh Chodesh blessing, give us a life, Chaim, sheyesh bahem yirat shamayim v'yirat chet. Give us a life where there is fear of heaven and fear of sin. Fear of heaven includes the two levels of yira that we spoke about, Yirat HaOnesh, but actually more primarily Yirat HaRomamut. Yirat Chet is actually picking up Avat Hashem. May our love for God be so deep that we are literally afraid to do anything wrong. Not because we're afraid of the consequences to us, but we don't want to bring tsar to the object of our love. So as a result, therefore, when it says Kriyat Yamsuf gave us Yira, it doesn't mean Yirat HaOnesh, that we got in Mitzrayim. It doesn't even mean Yirat HaRomamut. But by feeling Hashem's love for us, it made us feel our love for Hashem, and that led to the Madrega of Yirat Chet. So with this Hakdama, let's go back to the original question, you'll remember. That is, on the seventh day of Pesach, the Shibbolei Aleket tells us, in the name of the Medrash, which we don't have, that we only recite a half Hallel because our joy is diminished because of the destruction of the Egyptians. And it's just like the angels were told, Ma'aseh yadai tavu bayam v'atem omrim shira. But on the first day of Pesach, we seemingly don't care about that. If it's good for the Jews, that's all we care about. Whole Hallel, celebrate, and the like. Perhaps the difference is this. On the first day of Pesach, through the Makos and the like, we absorb the message of Yirat Hashem, fear of God, because we saw what God does to evildoers who don't obey Him. When you live in the world of Yira, your life is and your decisions are essentially egotistical. I make decisions based on the consequences to me. I better be good or else. Now, how I define the for me, of course, can matter. For me can mean me, it can mean my family, it can mean my community, it can mean my city, it can mean my nation. The for me can be narrowly defined, or hopefully as a person spiritually grows, it gets defined in a much broader way. Rav Kook writes about this a lot, that a person has to redefine who is the me in my life. A superficial person says me is only me. But as we grow in spiritual sensitivity, I understand that you is also part of me, and Klal Yisrael and the like. But no matter how broadly you define it, it's still an egotistical calculation, in the sense that I am making decisions based on the consequences to me and those that I hold dear. In that world, you really don't care that much as to what happens to other people. They are the collateral damage of the benefits to you. And we use the phrase collateral damage. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs, whatever the expression you want to use is. It had to be done for a higher purpose. So, as a result, on the first day of Pesach, where my relationship to God is based on Yira, which is a parochial idea of what's good for me, what's bad for me, we are particularists. We are not universalists. Hey, the Egyptians suffered, so what? But this was a good deal for us. But on the seventh day of Pesach, we graduate to love. Now, everyone knows, anyone that's in a relationship knows, that part of the idea of a loving relationship is you try to see the world through the eyes of the other person. Right? Men and women are very, very different. Right? The famous book, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. The Gemara itself says, men and women are deemed to be two different nations. That's what the Gemara says. Two different nations. They see the world, by and large, very, very differently. And but what is the idea of a union? I try, of course it's going to be imperfect, I try to see the world through the eyes of my spouse. My spouse tries to see the world through my eyes. And in that way, we somehow get a perception that is deeper and truer than any one perception would be. So, if loving another human being means you try to see the world through their eyes, then loving God means you try to see the world the way God sees the world. Now, obviously, that's more or less impossible. But there are some dimensions of commonality. We look at a world of good and evil, and we look at the evildoers as people that are trying to destroy us, and Baruch Hashem, they're gone. Good riddance. Now God looks at it that way too, but God has another cheshbon. God also sees, as I said before, the potential of goodness that could have been there. The tragedy of losing. God, as it were, is the parent of the mass murderer. And the same ambivalence that the parent of the mass murderer might have exists on some level in the Yiboneh Archives as well. How did it happen? What a tragedy that it happened. So as a result, the ability to commiserate with God in the destruction of even the evildoer can come only when your relationship with God is based on love, and not when it's based on fear. Because when it's based on fear, your only concern is, what is good for me? When it's based on love, you see the world the way God sees the world. Do you remember the book of Yonah? Yonah, we read it on Yom Kippur. Yonah was given the mission of going to the Assyrian city of Nineveh and giving him a message: you better do tshuva or God will destroy you. And Yonah didn't want to go. Actually, why didn't he want to go? It's very interesting. Because the Medrash says that the Umot HaOlam were more likely to do tshuva than the Jewish people, because they get emotionally attached to different things. Jewish people are stubborn. We're stubborn in good ways and we're stubborn in bad ways. So it's hard for us to do tshuva. Umot HaOlam, one day they'll do tshuva, the next day they'll go back again. They just respond to the feelings of the moment. So Yonah was afraid if they're going to do tshuva, it'll make the Jewish people look bad. So Yonah tried to run away, and everyone knows the story. He got in the fish, whatever happened there. But at the very end of the story, lo and behold, Nineveh does tshuva. And Yonah's not so happy. These were bad people. They should have been destroyed. Why is God giving them these chances? They don't deserve it. They're not worthwhile. And then if you remember at the end of the book, there's a little story that there's a hot day and God causes a plant to grow and give him shelter and shade. And then the plant dies. And Yonah is so bitter because the heat of the sun is overwhelming. And God says to him, you have so much care and concern for this little plant that's only 1 day old. It was here one day, gone the other day. And you think I don't care about the thousands and thousands of people in Nineveh? You think they don't matter?
And their animals?
Huh? And even their animals. The Talmud Yerushalmi says a fascinating point. It's not relevant to our subject, but the Talmud Yerushalmi says that sometimes God gives a person life not because they deserve it, but because their animal needs somebody to take care of them. So a person might have a dog, and God in Shemayim says, this person deserves to die, but who's going to take care of the dog? So God gives us life sometimes because the animal needs us. So that's an argument to have a pet, right? It's kind of an extra insurance policy that God will give you life because the pet needs you, and the like. So God is telling Yonah, everything matters to me. Everybody makes a difference. Everybody is needed. And when, because of their evil, they have to be destroyed. And again, let me emphasize, God is not a pacifist. God will destroy the evildoers. But it is done with sadness. It is done with regret. And we follow that way as well. We don't dance. I remember years ago, maybe more than 10 years ago, a picture of a terrorist who dipped his hands in the blood of his Jewish victims. And the blood was dripping from his fingers as he was dancing around the body in a frenzy. It would be inconceivable. It would be inconceivable, unless a Jewish person was literally mentally ill, that a Jewish chayal or a Jewish person would ever do such a thing. And again, I don't know why I'm hitting these politically divisive topics, but even someone like Baruch Goldstein, who did what he did, and again he did what he did, and it's something that most of us would denounce. But it was well known that in point of fact, as a physician, he acted with much, much compassion and respect for the Arabs that he treated. And if he snapped because he saw the potential of violence that was coming down the pipe, he certainly would not be a person that would rejoice in what he did. If he did what he did, he felt he had to do it. it was not something you have a simcha about. Because God does not have a simcha about it. But you see, you reach that level only when you have a love relationship with God. Because when you have a fear relationship with God, everything gets judged by what's good for you. So, if it's good for me, I don't really care what happens to them. When you love God, you try to see the world through God's relationship. So, it's a very interesting thing, therefore, that the dynamic that's articulated here is that love of God leads you to love other human beings because you see the world through God's perspective. To take this on a slightly deeper point, the Vilna Gaon actually says all human love that is not simply lust is really love of God. Because when you love another human being, what you love about them is you love their divine qualities. You may love their kindness, their compassion, their intellect. These are the divine qualities of the soul. And since every soul is from God, when a soul recognizes the godly qualities of the other, it loves them. It wants to be connected to them. So all human love is really a manifestation of divine love. And that's actually a fairly deep thought. Now there is, of course, something called lust or passion, which is just sexual excitement, and that could have a different dynamic. But if something is truly loving, it's the qualities of a person that cause you to love them. And each person is attuned to see different aspects of godliness, because godliness is an infinite matrix. But one can identify different qualities. Yeah.
Question. Wouldn't loving another human being because of his or her courage be an exception to that? We attribute kindness to God, we attribute integrity to God. We don't attribute courage to Hashem because he has no adversaries.
That's an interesting question. Courage, courage as we would understand it, seems to presuppose some element of putting yourself at risk or danger and then being willing for a higher cause to put yourself at risk. So we admire that as courage. So you're raising the very fascinating question, can God have courage? And if courage is not possible on a divine level, because God cannot be threatened by anybody, then why do I admire courage? Meaning if you go with the Vilna Gaon, that everything that I admire is essentially a mirror of a divine quality, then how would you explain our admiration for courage? No, I really no. That's very, very, very excellent, excellent point. But I think perhaps I have to think about it some more. That courage represents the magnitude of a commitment to that which is right. So in the case of a human being, it takes the form of ad kidei kach, that I risk something. In the case of God, it would just be the abstract commitment to do that which is just and that which is right. Meaning, it's the furthest degree that God is committed to that which is good. We would call that extreme commitment courage, but it may take a different form. So divine courage would equal, so to speak, divine commitment. But again, it needs a little more elaboration on that point. So basically, therefore, this is a very important message during Sfirat HaOmer. And I'll just end here, because Sfirat HaOmer is the linkage between two holidays. Pesach is Zaman Cherutenu, the season of freedom, liberation. Shavuot is Zaman Matan Toratenu, when God gave us a Torah. And Omer is the period that links the two Tikufot, as if to say they are fundamentally one long holiday. In fact, the Ramban has a lashon that Sfirat HaOmer could be looked at as a chol hamoed. Not really, but in some ways it's like a chol. So if you tell your boss you don't work chol hamoed, you could not show up from Pesach to Shavuos, and you would be within your rights, but as I say, it's very unlikely the position will be held open for you during that time. Now the linkage connotes the idea that freedom without commitment to Hashem is destructive. Erich Fromm, Freud's disciple, happened to be Jewish but not religious, made the point that freedom cannot be freedom from something. It has to be freedom towards something. And that's exactly, maybe he got it from the Omer, I don't know. That's exactly what the counting of the Omer is. Our freedom is towards a higher purpose. That's one aspect of Sphira. But the other aspect of Sphira is we know that during this period of time we observe various mourning restrictions. We don't get married. We don't listen to music. Again, the details you would check with your posek, haircuts. There's a certain sadness. Now, that's not inherent to this time. Inherently, this ought to be a joyous time. We're looking forward to Matan Torah. So why the sadness? This dates from a much later Tekufah, when the great Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students who died during this time, and we mourn their deaths. And the reason why they died is they did not show proper respect and honor to each other. So we mourn not so much to mourn, because after all we've had worse tragedies, but we mourn to become sensitive to the fact that we need to see each other with dignity, with honor, with respect. Rav Hirsch points out a very interesting etymological observation. Kavod, which we defined as honor, is the same shorish as kaved, which is heaviness. So here's the thing. Showing somebody honor is not a matter of etiquette or politeness. It's a certain attitude where you see somebody as weighty and significant. You see, I could be polite to somebody, but in my heart of hearts, I treat them as a lightweight, as somebody insignificant, as somebody who doesn't have anything to really add. Kavod is not just external, it is internal. I see the significance of the other person. In fact, even in the mitzvah of kibud aviyim, honoring your parents, Rav Chaim Shmulevitz used to say that the full fulfillment of the mitzvah is not simply treating your parents with respect, but it's identifying something in your parents that is worthy of honor, admiration, and emulation. Now, for most of us, that might be relatively easy. Other times it might be a little hard, but a person is obligated to look at some aspect of their parents and say, that is something admirable, that is something good. So it turns out that Sfirat Omer has two different things that we're doing. One is, we're intensifying our commitment to the Torah. And the other is, we're looking to see the goodness and the dignity in other people. Now, I just want to leave you with this idea that in the world that we live in, these two goals often seem to contradict each other. You often find a tendency that as people grow in their religious passion, it tends to be at the expense of how they view other people who are not moving in exactly that same direction. They tend to denigrate, they tend to exclude, they tend to look down upon. In fact, I know personally rabbis in the States who made people Balei Tshuva, made them from, but the people they made from don't. In fact, there's even a joke in certain rabbinic circles that, how do I know I have been successful in my kiruv efforts? when the person does not talk to me anymore because I'm not religious enough for them. I don't know if you've ever been familiar with that phenomenon. Right? That's the ultimate success, where my Talmud does not talk to me anymore. It's always said with kind of a bittersweet attitude. So we find that as I get more and more passionate about my Yiddishkeit, I see less and less kavod in others. And the other way around, you sometimes have big tent Judaism. I'm okay, you're okay. I embrace everything. Gay rights and abortion, all the causes are good. But that means that's at the expense of commitment to halacha. So what Sfiras Omer basically says is, this is not and cannot be an either-or situation. You embrace the fullness of halacha with passion, with fire, with commitment, with discipline. And at the same time, you view others not only with kindness but with respect, and see the significance in their personalities. And the way you break the inconsistency is by recognizing that Avat Yisrael and Kavod HaBriot are also part of the Torah. So if you're embracing the mitzvahs of the Torah with passion, you got to include that part of the Torah too. Right? It's not just the kashrus, the Shabbos, and the learning. It's also the whole realm of Bein Adam L'Chaveiro. So these are things we think about during this period of Sfirat HaOmer. Again, I wish you all a Chodesh Tov and a good year.
It's